Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Nun Bet. We are at the top of Nun Bet Amud Aleph in Masechet Zevachim. And so let me share my screen and we will get really started. So just as a quick reminder, on tomorrow we'll be back in person and on Zoom. Friday we will be Zoom only because I will be out of town. Zoom only. Okay, so yesterday we learned a brisa that focused on the Torah's repeating 3 times the phrase onto the base of the Ola altar. Now and the brisa told us, this phrase is mentioned in connection with the bull of a Kohen Gadol for making a mistake. That's in Vayikra Perek Daled Pasuk Zayin. The bull associated with a mistaken ruling by the Sanhedrin, Par Helam Davar, that's in Vayikra Perek Daled Pasuk Yirchet. And it's mentioned in connection with the king who makes a mistake, the Nasi, and that's in Vayikra Daled Perek Kaf So, I'm sorry, Vayikra Daled Pasuk Kaf excuse me. And so, this three phrases, excuse me, teach the following. So the first time the Brisa says it teaches that the remnant blood is poured on the outer altar, but not on the inner altar. Meaning, we know that it's referring to the outer altar because it says it references Pesach Oel Moed, and there's only one altar that is at the opening of the Oel Moed, of the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKodeshim, and that's the outer altar. So we know it's going to be the outer altar. So why did it specifically say the Mizbeach of the Ola, which is offered only on the outer altar? It specifically said that to tell you that only if you do the pouring on the outer altar is it good. If you do the pouring on the inner altar, it's not good. So that was point number 1. The second point, the second repetition, was to tell us that there is no base to the inner altar. So even if you wanted to do it on the inner altar, there isn't a place to pour it because you're supposed to pour the blood, the remaining blood, on the base of the altar, and that means there's like an amma wide base that was around the outer altar, around 2 sides and a little bit around the outer altar. Essentially went from the ramp all the way around to the northeast corner and then down the eastern side just a little bit. And that was, essentially where you could do it. And that's where the base was. And again, it was this amma wide, basically 2 feet, something like that, wide space that was an amma high, basically one step up around the entire base, where you could then have space to do things. And so this was where the blood would be poured. And then the third time, but there's no base like that on the golden altar. And then the third time that the Torah repeats onto the base of the Ola altar, it's telling us that there's a requirement. That says the pour. I spelled the word pour wrong there. It should be P-O-U-R. To pour the remnant blood at the base of the outer altar. That requirement doesn't just apply to the 5 situations in the Torah where it mentions it explicitly, but rather every time we have blood, any remnant blood is poured at the base of the outer altar. And so those were the 3 lessons of this brisa. And now we are in the middle of this brisa, and as we pick up on this with the second line on Nun Bet Amud Aleph. So the brisa said, Amar Eno Ella Mizbeach Shel Ola Yeheli Yisod. This is the next quote from the brisa, that we were saying that how do we know that the third repetition is telling us that you have to do this same pouring for every sacrifice? Maybe this is telling us that the that actually, when we throw the blood initially, we need to throw the blood only where there is a base beneath it. And that's where we're supposed to throw the first blood. Meaning, remember the process is we slaughter the animal, we catch the blood, we take the blood to the altar, and then we throw the blood onto the altar. Maybe that throw, and then whatever's left, we pour out. So the first four steps of that, the slaughter, the catching of the blood, the bringing of the blood, and the throwing of the blood, the initial throwing of the blood, all of those are mandatory. And if you don't do any of them, it's not a valid sacrifice. And so as a result, maybe when it references this extra time of saying that you need to pour it on the outer altar, on the base of the outer altar, it's telling you, you know what? That's also where you need to do the throwing, initial throwing, right opposite that base. And so the Gemara says, Miksiv. So, but one second, how could you even have that Havamina? Because Miksiv El Yesod Ha'olah, does it tell you to go to the base of the Ola? No, El Yesod Mizbach Ha'olah Ksiv. It says to the base of the Ola altar, meaning that if you, let's take a second. Let's take a look at Rashi. Miksiv. I didn't write down that to look at Rashi here. So Miksiv. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down in the narrow lines of Rashi on Nun Bet Amud Aleph. Miksiv El Yesod Ha'olah El Yesod Mizbach Ha'olah Ksiv. So Bishlama, it would make sense. Idarashta le litain Torah shvicha shirayim lekol damim hachitzonim, that the lesson that we want to learn makes more sense than this alternative lesson. Again, the lesson that we want to learn is that all sacrifices need to have their shirayim blood poured on the base of the outer altar. And we're learning that from the third repetition of this phrase, El Mizbach, El Yesod Mizbach Ha'olah. And so that makes sense to try and apply it to every other sacrifice. Shapir Ksiv Mizbeach Ha'olah. That's why it specifically refers to the altar of the Ola. Litain Torah's Yesod, in order to tell us that the rule associated with pouring on the base, Lemizbeach Ha'olah, L'kol Dam HaNizrakin Alav. It's for all blood that's thrown on it. That's why we specifically reference the Ola altar, because it's not just this sacrifice that it's referring to is a sin offering, a chatas, but it's telling us that you need to do it on the Ola altar in order to tell you that even an Ola would have that same requirement. But if you're telling me that the phrase as the Hava Amina is at the moment, that maybe it's telling us something else, and that it's telling us that the first blood gets thrown on that altar where there's a base, I would know that. I wouldn't have written all that phrase. If it was coming to tell us only about the first blood and where you throw it, kadarashta, that's lay, and that's how you're going to learn it. Suleikalamemar litain Torah keneged hayesod lemizbeach haolah lekol damav. It wouldn't need to say that it's specifically the yesod of the mizbeach of the olah for all the blood. Dahachat as teuna matan al arba karanos. We need the sin offering is specifically required to be put on all four corners. The Keren Deromis Mizrachis and the southeast corner, Bichlal, is included in that. Meaning, remember that we put from the Chatas, we put the blood on what are known as the Karnei HaMizbeach, the horns of the Mizbeach, which are the four raised platforms in the corners, the Amma by Amma platforms in the corner that are required. And one of them is in the southeast corner. And you know what isn't underneath that corner? A base. There is no base of the altar in that corner. And so as a result, va'al karchach a'ola lichudei tidrasheha. And so as a result, if you're going to tell me that there's a requirement that the initial blood be put on the altar only in the location where there is a base, well, it can't be referencing the chatas because the chatas isn't true. So havalela michtav. So therefore, it should have just said el yesod ha'olah, not referencing the mizbeach, because the word mizbeach suggests that it's for all sacrifices that are on that mizbeach, and it's only the olah that is put only where the yesod is located. In the olah, you put it on the two corners, on the southwest corner and the northeast corner, both of which have a yesod underneath them, and you put it on both sides of the corner, both the south and the west side of the southwest corner, and the north and the east side of the northeast corner. And that way you have two applications, and the blood ends up on four sides of the Mizbeach. And so that is, so as a result, that should be how, so we don't need the word Mizbeach. So, right, so again, in the Rashi, Havalei Michtav El Yesod Ha'olah, Shetehei Ha'olah Keneged HaYesod HaMizbeach Mizbach Ha'olah. So Mizbach Ha'olah, Mahi. Why are you specifically including the word Mizbach in this pasuk? We don't need it if it's supposed to teach us about the initial placement.
So there's no Yesod around the entire Mizbeach?
No, it's not around the entire Mizbeach. The Yesod is not around the entire Mizbeach. The Yesod goes from roughly the ramp in the southwest corner. Then it goes along the full west side, along the full north side, and then it goes a little bit on the east side, but only in the top, only in the northeast side of the east side, only on the northern side of the east side. And then the entire rest of the east side and the southeast corner do not have any yesod underneath them. Okay, so now the Gemara answers, no, you know what? If it would have just said El Yesod Ha'olah, I would not have thought what the truth, because I havaksiv El Yesod Ha'olah, if it had said onto the base of the Olah, Hava Amina Bizakifa El Yesod, I would have thought that the initial application should be on the face of the, on the vertical face of the Yesod, of the base. And that's not where it needs to go. It needs to go somewhere above the horizontal face, the roof. Hashda diksiv el yesod mizbach haolah agago di yesod. That tells us that it's got to go above, on or above the roof. And so as a result, that's, in fact, we did have a reasonable Hava Amina. And again, we end up with a Kal V'chomer that we're about to quote that rejects that as the read. And that's why we say El Yesod Mizbach Ha'olah the third time is telling us that every sacrifice needs to have its blood poured, the remnant blood poured out on the base of the altar. So
on the Yesod?
What?
On the Yesod?
On the Yesod, correct.
So then that eastern wing, you don't put any blood there. Is that what we're saying?
You don't pour any remnant blood on the eastern side of the altar. That is correct. So, but again, depending on the sacrifice, there is some blood that can be on the southeastern corner, namely a chatas, that where you have to put it on the keren of the keren of the mizbeach. Well, then that will go certainly even on the southeast corner, because that is where you have four corners, and you need to put it on all four corners.
Well, how are you defining the gog? Is that the platform of the mizbeach?
It's not. It's essentially the gog is the horizontal surface that is parallel to the floor. That is the gog. Okay, so Amar Rabbi Yishmael. So now we're going to paraphrase there. It's interesting because the Brisa did not actually reference Gog, but now that we said that we mean the Gog, we're going to include it. So Gog Yesod Lamali Kra. Why do I need a verse to tell us this? Because Kal V'chomer hu. I would learn the need for the placement of the initial blood, that it needs to be above the roof of the base from the following Kal V'chomer. When it comes to the pouring of the remnant blood of a sin offering, it does not provide any atonement, and yet you have to put it on the roof of the base, and you can't put it on the side of the base. Tchilas olas shemichaperet. When you put the initial application of an ola sacrifice on the sides of the mizbeach, it has to also be at least at the height of the roof of the base as well. And so that's the Kal V'chomer. And that's why we don't need the words El Yesod Mizbach HaOlah to teach us this lesson. And therefore, El Yesod Mizbach HaOlah is telling us that every sacrifice requires the pouring of blood, the remnant blood, at the Yesod. So Amar Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says, no, it's a little different, the Kal V'chomer. When it comes to the remnant blood, it does not atone, and it does not come for an atonement. To unagag yisod, it needs to be put on the base of the roof of the base. So tchilas olas shemichaperezu v'alachaper. When it comes to the initial application of blood for the ola sacrifice, which does come to atone, it needs to also be put on the Eino din unagag yisod. It certainly should need to be put on the roof of the base. So Im Kain, my Talmud Lomer, the Brisa then continued after giving these two Kal V'chomers that teach us the lesson about where the Ola blood initially needs to be put. So therefore, why do we say El Yesod Mizbach HaOlah? Why does the Torah repeat it a third time? Tein Yesod LeMizbeach Shel Olah. The point is that you need to give the blood, remnant blood of all sacrifices. All of them need to be put on the base of the altar for Ola sacrifices, namely the outer altar.
On the Yesod.
On the Yesod, correct. So my Beinahu, so now that we quoted again Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael's Kal V'chomer, my Beinahu, what's the difference between them? So two possibilities. Amar Rav Ada bar Ahava. Rav Ada bar Ahava says the following, that here's the difference between them. Shirayim ma'akvin ika benayu. The question is, do we require the placement of the pouring of the remnant blood? Is it a crucial element for achieving atonement? Mar Savar Ma'akve, Rabbi Yishmael, who says that it's not necessary it's not the step that begins, that confirms the atonement. It's not the step that triggers atonement. It is, however, a step that confirms atonement. So when Rabbi Yishmael says, it means that it doesn't trigger the atonement. But if you then don't do the pouring, then in fact you won't actually get atonement. Whereas Umar Savar Lo Ma'akve, and Rabbi Akiva says no, it's the exact opposite. That in fact it's you don't not only do you not need to pour it in order to trigger the atonement, but you don't even need to have poured it in the end of the day, and you'll still get atonement. Again, because the way we're reading it is the following: we say that according to Rabbi Yishmael, the she'ena mechaperet means it doesn't initially trigger the atonement, and when Rabbi Akiva says that it's mechaperet uva lechaper, it means it doesn't trigger the atonement, and it doesn't even serve as an essential element of atonement. And so that's what they're disagreeing about. Rabbi Akiva says it's not essential for atonement, and Rabbi Yishmael says it is essential. But Rav Papa says differently. Rav Papa Amar, no, Dekuli Alma Shirayim Ein Makvin. Everybody agrees that the leftover blood is not essential to achieve atonement. And what they're arguing about is the squeezing out of a bird chatas, whether that squeezing out of the blood onto the base of the altar is considered essential. Mar Savar Ma'akev, Umar Savar Lo ma'akev. Again, same same direction. Rabbi Yishmael says that squeezing the blood out is essential, is required for atonement, and Rabbi Akiva says it is not. Now, let's quickly go over the process of the bringing of a bird sin offering. So first, the Kohen does malika. That after that malika, if the blood that is spurting out is then going to be aimed at the altar, and that is going to go on the altar. Now, after the spurting is complete, there is what happens to the rest of the blood that's in the bird's body. And so that gets squeezed out onto the base of the altar, and that is effectively like the shirayim. Now, that what the debate between, according to Rav Papa, between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva is whether if you ran out of the blood that was in the bird's body, is that going to be a problem or not? Rabbi Yishmael will say it's a problem because you need to do you need to do it. Even the rest of the blood in the body needs to be put on the base of the altar. And Rabbi Akiva says no, it does not. And Tanya Kavase de Rav Papa. And we're going to.
Why would he run out? I mean, if he's aiming it in a certain direction, he puts a little here, a little there, a little there. Well, what does it mean to say it runs out? The blood runs out.
Meaning that there's no way if well, first of all, it's according to Rabbi Akiva, if you just skip the step, it would be okay. Right? It's not essential. So as a result, it's not ma'akev. So if you just skip the step and you never pour, squeeze out any blood from the bird onto the base, you'll be okay. And according to Rabbi Yishmael, no, that's an essential step of the bird chatas offering. Okay.
So if he skipped, but how much does one need to
even
extract
any drops,
even a few drops
will be sufficient. Any
few drops.
Yes. So
and does the entire and what after Malika does the entire is it sufficient that he squirts a small amount, or does he have to squirt the entire blood that comes out of the animal at that time?
The initial squirting just needs to be any amount. It doesn't. It is not the specific amount. Isn't specifically. There isn't a sort of minimum amount of volume that needs to be done.
I'm just picturing this. He's holding this bird. He does Malika. Now, if in order to do, I mean, most people when they hold something and they use their fingers to open it or so forth, that item, in this case, the bird, is going to be facing him. So the initial squirting of blood is going to spill on the coin unless he somehow manipulates it very quickly.
No.
But otherwise, he has to turn it so that blood squirts out onto the altar.
It's just like, the old kind of bottle caps that you would flip off with your, in this kind of motion. So you're going to, again, you're going to, the Kohen is going to hold the bird like this. His nail is going to go into the back of the neck of the bird, right. And he's going to push it into the neck of the bird, and he's going to hold that away from himself so that the blood spurts effectively away from him. It's not that's how I'm understanding it.
It's a little awkward though, because if he's hurting the bird, he's got to turn his hand. He may need to
hold it down. Yes, 100%. He may need to hold it in a slightly awkward position. I don't know exactly which direction the blood spurts out in, whether it spurts towards the head, it spurts towards the base, it spurts directly perpendicular. It would, depending on the direction of the spurting of the blood, that would determine which direction. Okay, but in any event,
be awkward. That's all.
Yes, agree that it could be awkward. All right, so Tanya Kavase de Rav Papa, we have a brisa that agrees with Rav Papa, because this brisa is going to note that Rabbi Yishmael says that for a large animal, not as opposed to a bird, a large animal, the pouring of the shirayim is not necessary. And according to Rav Ada bar Ahava, Rabbi Yishmael would say that for a large animal, the pouring is essential. So that's how we know that this is going to be consistent with Rav Papa. So it's gonna take a little while to get there, but let's see how the Gemara gets there, what the Brisa says. Ve'ez kol dam hapar yishpoch. Now, this pasuk is talking about, this pasuk from Vayikra Daled Perek Zayin, pasuk Zayin, excuse me, Perek Daled pasuk Zayin, is talking about the Kohen Gadol's bull. That is when the Kohen Gadol makes a mistake. And it says, as kol dam hapar yishpoch, all of the blood of the bull you will spill. Now the problem is that we all, well, yes, that is true, but the issue is that we already referenced and know that it's a bull that is the offering of the Kohen Gadol. So why did it specifically reference bull again? So Ma Talmud Lomar Hapar, the bull. So Limid Al Par Yom Kippurim. It's teaching us a lesson about a different bull, a bull that is brought by the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. Sheton Matan Damim Liyasod. It's telling us that you have to pour the remnant blood of its sacrifice also on the base of the outer altar. Divrei Rebbe, that's what Rebbe says. And Amar Rabbi Yishmael says, Kal v'chomer, you don't need the pasuk to tell us that. We would figure that out from a Kal v'chomer. Uma'im mi she'ein nechnas damo lifnim chova. When it comes to the Kohen Gadol's bull for making a mistake, where it does not go into the Kodesh, it is not put on in the Kodesh, and yet Ton Yesod, it requires the pouring of the remnant blood on the base of the altar, on the outer altar. So Misha Nichnas Damo Lifnim Chova. Well, then certainly, if you're going to say that you have to bring the blood inside the Kodesh, you're going to say that it's going to be unnecessary. Eino din sheton yesod. Well, then certainly you're going to say that it needs to be poured on the the remnant blood needs to be poured on the outer altar. And Amar Rabbi Akiva says, I can give you one better kal v'chomer. Umami she'ein damo nichdas lifnei v'lifnim. When it comes to the Kohen Gadol's bull, that doesn't even enter the Kodesh HaKodashim, Bein lechova, bein lemitzvah. You're not allowed to bring it in there. It's not an obligation. It's not a commandment. There's no requirement at all. Ton yesod, and yet it needs to be poured on the base. The remnant blood needs to be poured on the base of the outer altar. Misha nichtas damo chovo livnei v'livnim. When it comes to the Yom Kippur bull, where you do bring it into the Kodesh HaKodashim, and the Kohen Gadol stands there between the staves of the ark of the covenant, and sprinkles towards the parochet. Eino din sheton yesod. Then it certainly requires, that should certainly require the pouring of the remnant blood at the base of the outer altar. Now, Yachol Yaakvenu, Rabbi Yishmael continues his discussion and says, I might have thought that this pouring is absolutely necessary, and if you don't do it, it's not a good sacrifice. Talmud v'chila mikaper et hakodesh. He shall finish atoning for the sanctuary. And what is that referencing? Shamu kol hakaparos kulan. That all of the atonements are finished at that point, and that is referring to when you've done all of the sprinkling, and not the pouring of the remnant blood, which isn't even mentioned in connection with the Yom Kippur bull. And so so it's clear. Divrei Rabbi Yishmael. That's what Rabbi Yishmael says. So according to Rabbi Yishmael, it is clear that there is no obligation to pour the remnant blood from the bull of Yom Kippur onto the yesod of the outer altar, and that means that it's not ma'akev. Even though there's a requirement to do it, you have to do it if you have any, but if you don't do it, it's not ma'akev. It doesn't prevent the sacrifice from working, and so as a result, it's all okay. And so, therefore, that is completely inconsistent with Rav Ada bar Ahava, because Rav Ada bar Ahava said that, according to Rabbi Yishmael, the pouring of the remnant blood is essential. And so, and we continue on.
So, according to Rabbi Akiva, can he just spill the blood out in the drain then?
Yes. Yeah. Well, if you did, it would be okay. You're not supposed to. There's an obligation to do it. It's a chova, but it's not ma'akev. It's important to remember the difference between chova and ma'akev. Chova means that it's a requirement or
Right,
it's a
right,
mitzvah to do it, but it's not ma'akev, meaning
right,
that it's not going to undo it if you don't do it. So kal v'chomer, the
right.
Brisa continues, kal v'chomer lepar Kohen Mashiach, and certainly when it comes to the Kohen Gadol's par me'ata from this. Uma misha ein nichnas damo lifnim lo chova v'lo mitzvah. When it comes to the par of the Yom of Kohen Gadol for when he does a sin, where there's no obligation to bring that blood into the Kodesh, whether it's not an obligation, it's not even a mitzvah, there's nothing that applies. Ton Yesod, and yet it requires the base. Misha nichtas damo lefnim bein lechova bein lemitzvah eno din sheton Yesod. When it comes to the Kohen Gadol's I'm sorry, this is a kavachomer from the Nasi's goat. That when it comes to the Nasi's goat, the blood doesn't go into the Kodesh or at all. And yet there's a requirement for it to get poured on the base of the altar. So similarly, when it comes to the Kohen Gadol's bull, where there is an obligation to bring it into the Kodesh, meaning it's both a chova and a mitzvah, that it means that you're required to do it. Eino din shetan yesod. Well, then certainly it should require pouring on the base. Yakol again yakvenu. I might have thought that that pouring would be absolutely essential. Tamalomar, there's kol dam hapar yishpoch, that all of the blood of the bull he shall pour on the base. Nitku hakasav laase, that even though elsewhere in these psukim, it's the ordering of the noun and verb, the object and the verb, is that is that verb comes before the object. Here we've changed the order. That's called dam hapar yishpoch. The verb comes after the object. We're going to all of the blood he shall pour. So nitgu hakasav laase. So it's effectively created it. It separated it from the rest of the commandments. But aso shiore mitzvah, and what it should say is it made it all into just a positive thing that you should do, but not essential. Lomar lach shirayim ein ma'akvin. And so the bottom line is of this brisa is that Rabbi Yishmael agrees that all of these pouring of the remnant blood is not ma'akev, and that is consistent with Rav Papa and not with Rav Ada bar Ahava. And so as a result, at least at the moment, we are effectively rejecting Rav Ada bar Ahava's answer. And
It's also consistent with Rabbi Akiva, right?
Well, yes, it's all Rabbi Akiva is consistent. The Rabbi Akiva's position in this brisa that we just quoted and in the earlier brisa is consistent whether you go like Rav Ada bar Ahava or Rav Papa. So that's why we're focused on Rabbi Yishmael, because the difference in the position between Rav Ada bar Ahava and Rav Papa is really in Rabbi Yishmael's view of whether shirayim of a large animal, of a major sacrifice, is necessary, is essential to be poured at the remnant blood is essential to be poured at the base of the altar. According to Rav Ada bar Ahava, Rabbi Yishmael says it is essential. And according to Rav Papa, Rabbi Yishmael says it's not essential. And so that's why we brought this brisa, which says that Rabbi Yishmael says it's not essential, in order to show that this is consistent with Rav Papa. Now, now that
so,
we
said... Wait, is Rabbi Akiva, does he agree with both Rav Papa, Rav Ada bar Ahava, or no? He doesn't
remember, Rabbi Akiva is a Tana. Rav Papa and Rav Ada bar Ahava are Amoraim who are trying to explain the argument between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. Okay, so let's remember that that's the context that we're dealing with. And so the point is that according to both Rav Papa and Rav Ada bar Ahava, Rabbi Akiva would say that the pouring of the remnant blood is not essential in any case, And so as a result, there's no inconsistency. So that's why we're not asking or using his opinion to prove whether Rav Papa is correct or Rav Ada bar Ahava is correct. Okay, so Rav Papa said that there was an argument between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael that focused on squeezing out a bird's chatas blood. But 1 second, V'sava Rabbi Yishmael, does Rabbi Yishmael really say mitzui chatas ha'of ma'akev, that squeezing out a bird's chatas blood is actually required, meaning that remnant blood on the base of the yesod of the outer altar, that has to happen? V'hatana debei Rabbi Yishmael, we had a Tana that from the Rabbi Yishmael's academy, from Yisrael Yeshiva, that taught the following: V'hanishar badam yimatzei, whatever remains of the blood shall be squeezed out on the base of the altar. This is a pasuk in Vayikra Parakeh, pasuk Tet, and that's where we get the source of the requirement to squeeze out blood. V'hanishar yimatzei. That what is it telling us? It's only whatever is left needs to be squeezed out. The implication is v'she'eno nishar, if nothing is left out, lo yimatzei, you don't have to squeeze it out. And as Rashi says, top Rashi on Nudbet bet as we turn the daf, kolomar im yetzei kol hadam b'hazah ein sarich mitzui. If all of the blood got squirted out in the initial squirtings, then there's in the throwing of the blood, well then ein sarach mitzvah, you wouldn't even need to do the squeezing. There's no requirement for squeezing at all. So that implies that squeezing out the blood is not essential. So which is it? Does Rabbi Yishmael say, like Rav Papa says, that in fact squeezing out the blood is essential, or does Rabbi Yishmael say, like the Tana Debei Rabbi Yishmael taught, that it's not essential? So the answer is both. Trei Tanai aliba de Rabbi Yishmael. There was a machlokas among Tanaim based on what Rabbi Yishmael said. So in the brisa that we were explaining before, that Rav Papa was explaining, the author of that brisa, the one who was telling us what Rabbi Yishmael said, he would say that in fact it is essential. And the Tana, Debei Rabbi Yishmael, that taught that it's not essential was a different Tana. And so as a result, they were arguing as to what the view of Rabbi Yishmael really was.
So, and what about Rav Ada bar Abba?
Well, Rav Ada bar Ahava, his opinion seems to be rejected, meaning based on what we're seeing so far, there does not seem to be anyone who says that actually there are Tanaim who say that pouring the remnant blood on the yesod of the outer altar is essential to achieving atonement. And that's where the Gemara is going to go next. So it's a great segue question that you asked. Because Amar Rami Bar Chama, Hai Tana Savar Shirai Ma'akve. Maybe we could say that yes, right now it doesn't look good for Rav Ada bar Ahava's answer. But we could say that there is a Tana who says that pouring remnant blood is a required part of a sin offering. Titania, because we have a long brisa that we are going to now spend much of the rest of today on, and we will see that it doesn't explicitly say that the pouring of the Shirayim blood is ma'akev, but we're going to read into the language at the very end that it is. And I will point out the language that we will focus on when we get there. But in general, much of this is relevant, but not going to be directly on point. So Titania, here's the brisa. HaKohen HaMechate Osa. It says, this is a pasuk by Yikra Perek Vav, pasuk Yud Tet. And it says, this is the law of the sin offerings. And the pasuk continues that the Kohen who applies it, so applies namely the blood of the sin offering, that person is the one who's going to get to eat it. So this osa that we had, osa shenitan dama lamala, velo osan shenitan dama lamata. That when we say that you need to have sprinkled the blood, and you're the one who sprinkled the blood and get to eat the korban as a kohen, you have to put the blood in the right place. Namely, the zrika that has to happen for this sin offering is it needs to be on the four horns of the altar, the four top corners of the altar. Velo osa shenitan damalamata. But if you put it below, well, then it is not going to be a good offering, and therefore it's going to be a problem. Let's take a look at Rashi. Nun bet bet, second line, hamachate osa, hazorik es dama, if you throw the blood, ubiklala dezos toras hachatas ksiv. And this is part of the general category of the rules generally for sin offerings, ota. Ksiv ota, and it says it, miuta, it comes to exclude he. And what is it coming to exclude? Im mechate es dama kehilchaso, if you throw the blood the way you're supposed to, great. Shekasavti, like I wrote, like Hashem wrote, kasavti lecha, as Hashem wrote for you. So then, ba kranot, by putting it on the horns, dahainu lamala, which are above the midline, hu dahavi chitui. That is going to be a good application, v'nechelet, and you get to eat the korban. Eat low, but if you don't do that, low, you're not going to get the korban. So Amar, back into the Gemara, we are 1, 2, 3, 5 lines down, third word on the line. Amar ta v'chimi ayin bata. But one second, if you say, where is this coming from? Miklal shenemar v'dam zvachecha yishafech al hamizbeach. The point is, it says that you should pour out the blood on the altar, and this refers to one spilling. And we saw previously that there's only one application that is ma'akev. So we learned when it came to the four applications, shim nosta b'matana achat kiper, that if you do even just one application, you're still going to get atonement. So yachol, I might think that because doing one is sufficient and you don't have to do all four, yachol avhanitanin lemalash nitzanan lemata kiper. I might have thought that even if you put below the line the blood and you don't put it on the top of the altar, you put it below half the midpoint of the altar, you would also get atonement. V'dinhu, but there's logic to say that's not the case. V'nemru damim lamala, v'nemru damim lamata. Sometimes you have to put the blood above, and sometimes you have to put the blood below. Ma dam hamurim lamata, just as when there's a requirement to put the blood below, shinasanan lamala lo keeper, you wouldn't get atonement if you put the blood above the line. So too, if you have blood above, I would think that you would not get atonement. Low, that logic actually doesn't work. So you can't use just logic to teach us that lesson, because ima marta betachtonim shenitanim b'netina lamala she'ein sofan lamala. Right, when it comes to the putting of the blood from the bird sin offering, which goes below the line, that blood never, meaning the blood of that animal, never ends up above the line. And so as a result, low keeper. Therefore, if you were to go ahead and put it above the line, you would not get atonement. But tomar be'el yonim, but when it comes to the blood of a big sin offering, where you put it on, you're supposed to put it on the four corners, but some of that blood, namely the remnant blood, is going to get poured on the base of the altar, which is below the line. So as a result, maybe that should still be valid. So damim hapnimim yochichu. No, we can use that logic. Doesn't work either, because we can use the inner blood to disprove that argument. Sheyesh mehen karev b'chutz, because after all, some of the blood that is sprinkled on the inner altar is brought outside the sanctuary, namely the remnant blood. V'im nisanan b'tchila b'chutz lo kiper. But if you were to go ahead and put blood, instead of putting it on the inner altar, you were to just go ahead and directly put it on the altar, even though eventually some blood is going to get put on the outer altar, that wouldn't work. No, low. Actually, that argument also doesn't work, because im amarta bedamim hapnimim she'ein mizbeach hapnimim amarkan. No, when it comes to, and this is the crucial line for why we're brought this whole brisa, so it's important to keep this in mind, that if you want to say, how can you use anything that's on the inner altar to say, the sprinkling that's done on the inner altar, to say that you're going to learn something about the outer altar? Because the sprinkling that's on the inner altar, that does not complete The service, namely the putting the blood on the inner altar, isn't the completion of the service. And we are going to say in 2 seconds, what is the completion of the service? Isn't this implying that the pouring of the shirayim is completing of the service, which means that it's essential? And so isn't this author of this brisa going to be saying that it's essential? We'll get there in just a moment. But right now we're just trying to show that you can't learn from the inner altar to the outer altar, and therefore we have to learn from the pasuk that was quoted from the very beginning, Hakohen Hamachate Osa. So Tomar be'el yonim shahare kranos memorakos osan. But when you can't necessarily then infer something to the outer sin offerings, where when we apply it above, it completes the process and completes the avoda. Im nasanam lamatik sherim, that therefore you should put it on the bottom, should be kosher. So therefore, Talmud lomar osa, and so as a result, we need the word osa shanita damim lamala, velo shanita damim lamata. That in fact you cannot put, if you have to put the blood above the line, you can't put it below the line. And if you have to put the blood below the line, you can't put it above the line. So now we finish quoting the brisa. We go back to quote the language that I highlighted just a moment ago. What do we mean that the sprinkling of the blood on the inner altar does not complete the process? Lav elu shirayim. Isn't that because the pouring of the shirayim is the completing of the process, and therefore the pouring of the shirayim is ma'akev? And now we've shown that there's a Tana who says that pouring of the shirayim is ma'akev. Amarle Rava said back to Rabbi Bar Chama, no, if that were true, that in fact the pouring of the shirayim was ma'akev, we would have a completely different argument that we would be making in this brisa. Tasi b'kal v'chomer. We could learn the lesson that you're not allowed to pour the top part on the bottom part. That if the blood is required to be above the line, you wouldn't be allowed to put it below the line. We would be able to learn it from a kal v'chomer. Mashi rayim hapanim and shesofen chova b'chutz. When it comes to the leftover blood of things that are sprinkled in the inner altar, it's absolutely required to go on the outer altar. And yet, asan b'tchila b'chutz lo kiper. And yet, if you put it on the outer altar, where eventually you're going to be required to put something, it doesn't work. So now, hanitanim lamala she'ein sofa lachova lamata. When it comes to something where you have no obligation to put anything below the line, then certainly asan b'tchila lamata. And now, yet, even though you have no obligation to put anything below the line, you go ahead and instead of putting the blood above the line, you put it below the line. Eino din shelo kippur, which certainly shouldn't create any kind of atonement. So we would have a great kal v'chomer, and the fact that we don't make that kal v'chomer shows that your logic, Rami Bar Chama, is incorrect. Rather, Ella, what is it in fact that is a reference to the fact that the blood sprinkled on the inner blood doesn't complete the atonement? Ein mizbach hapanim markan bilvad ella parokas. No, it's because anytime you sprinkle blood on the inner altar, you are also sprinkling blood towards the parochet. And you need to do both of them in order for the sacrifice to be an atonement. And so that's what it's referring to. And therefore, at the moment, we have seen that there is no Tana who says that pouring the shirayim blood is absolutely required. Now we're going to have very quickly a quote a brisa that we've seen before. We saw it about 2 weeks ago that says that there is somebody who says in a particular instance, namely the inner sacrifices, maybe there is a requirement to pour the shirayim blood on the outer altar. So Tanu Rabbanan V'kila Mechaper. So what does it say? The Torah says, this is a pasuk by Yikra Parak Tes Zayin pasuk Kaf, and it says he shall complete the atoning. So what's this is a Rabbi Akiva's opinion that we're quoting at the moment. We'll see in a moment. Im kiper kila. If you perform these things that trigger atonement, namely the sprinkling of the blood on the inner altar, Kila, you're finished, you're done, meaning you don't need to also do the shirayim on the outer altar. The imlo kiper, but if you did not do every single application of the blood on the inner altar, lo kila. You did not finish and you did not get atonement. Divrei Rabbi Akiva. That's what Rabbi Akiva says. Amar lo Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, no. Mimnei mai no mar lo no mar. Why aren't you saying the exact opposite? I would think that the language of the pasuk, where it says v'chila mekaper, that if you complete, you atone. What does that mean? Im kila kiper. If you complete all of the applications, well then kiper, then you've got an atonement. The im lo kila, and if you don't complete all the applications, lo kiper, you did not get atonement. She'im chisar chaz mekol matanos, that if you leave out any one of the applications, lo asav lo klum, you haven't done anything. So my menayu, what is the difference between these two opinions? Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. There's a machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. We don't know who says what, but we'll try to say that in a moment. Chad Amar, one says, Mashmaus Dorshanika Benayu. That no, it's just how you learn. Really, there's no substantive difference between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yehuda. They both agree that the applications on the inner altar, every single one of them is required, and if you don't do it, then it's going to be a problem. And they also agree that you do not need to pour, even though it's a mitzvah to pour, but you don't need to pour the remnant blood on the base of the outer altar. And what they're really arguing about is when we say the kila makaper, do you learn it in the forward direction, meaning only if you do everything do you achieve atonement, or do you learn it in the reverse direction, and that only that once you achieve atonement you are finished? So that's the argument. It's just how we learn the words, not what they mean. But one of these opinions says, Shirayim ma'akvin ikabenayu. No, what the difference is that according to one opinion, it's going to be that the Shirayim, that is whether or not you need to pour the remnant blood for this inner sacrifice, whether that's required to be done on the outer altar. That Rabbi Akiva says it's not essential, and Rabbi Yehuda says it is essential. And so this would be an opinion that says that pouring of Shirayim blood on the outer, on the yesod of the outer altar is actually essential. And Tistayim, the Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, who the Amar Shirayim Ma'akve, maybe we can show that it's Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi who says that the argument is about whether or not the pouring of the remnant blood is essential. And again, the idea would be is that when it says v'chila mekaper, it means v'chila, you have to finish everything that you did. Namely, you have to finish the entire process, including pouring the blood on the outer altar. So, to Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, l'divrei haomer shirayim ma'akvin. Maybe that according to the one who says shirayim is ma'akiv, clearly Rabbi Yeshua is saying somebody says that pouring of shirayim blood is ma'akev. Maybe parachad, that if in fact it were to spill the blood, matchil b'tchila b'fnim, you have to do some new sprinklings in order to have remnant blood left over to pour again. So atu Rabbi Yochanan leislei hasvara. 1 second, are you saying that Rabbi Yochanan would disagree with that philosophy, meaning he thinks that nobody would say that? But Rabbi Yochanan also said, Tana de Rabbi Nechemia, Kedivrei HaOmer Shirayim Ma'akvin. Rabbi Nechemia taught inconsistent with the way that somebody who says that the pouring of the remnant blood is essential. Ela Kedivrei HaOmer. So what does it mean, Kedivrei HaOmer? Lav lahani tanai. It means not necessarily Rabbi Akiva or Rabbi Yehuda. Hachanami, Kedivrei HaOmer, lav lahani tanai. No, you can't necessarily say which of these two opinions is the right one. Rather, everybody could be consistent with each approach. And the idea is, sorry for not scrolling, and the idea is that actually there's a machlokus between whether or not that there is an opinion that says that the pouring of the remnant blood of the inner sacrifices is essential, but it's not a universal viewpoint. But there are some who say that pouring of remnant blood is required to be done on the base of the outer altar. That brings us to the next Mishnah, but for that discussion, you'll have to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. We have to leave the room, so I'm going to end the program. Thank you so much.
Oh boy.